Afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for coming on. There's a bit of space, by the way, up the front down here if you guys don't want to be standing for the next hour. Just jump down on the floor there. Welcome to this session on ASP and MVC, what's new and cool in versions 2 and 3, presented by myself, John Daniel, and the ever-lovely Jeremy Boyd. We're from Mindscape in Wellington. Hopefully most of you know who we are, have seen us around. This is our last session of TechEd, so it's awesome. Can't wait to the end of this one. Cool, so the agenda. We wanted to kind of cover off on what are some of the features that have been introduced since MVC 1. I mean, I don't know if you guys are similar to us, but you grabbed MVC 1 because it was pretty new and cool, and you built a new project on it. Didn't really, nothing really jumped out with MVC 2 or 3, or there wasn't enough noise made about it because it doesn't come out with new Visual Studio builds or get quite the hype, so you might not be aware of some of the stuff that's in there. And Jeremy's going to jump in, and he's going to... You take over, man.
What I'll do is I'll kind of just go through some of the thoughts about how you could possibly extend the framework, focusing mostly on version 2 really, because of course version 3 is still in preview, right?
Yeah, first preview.
Yep. So then after I'm done with that, JD, you're going to take over again and you're going to tell us about what's sort of coming in version 3.
Yeah, it's just going to be a high level look at version 3 because it is only in the first preview state. Cool. So firstly, I wanted to just do a quick run through of the key features that came around with MVC 2. The first one, which was quite useful, was this notion of areas, and it's a way of breaking up large websites into smaller pieces, effectively. So I don't know if any of you have built really large MVC websites. We've built a couple where they get pretty big. You end up, you've got 25 controllers, but you tend to know that your website is actually certain components. For example, the Mindscape website, we've got forums, blog, store, and then just the rest of the site. It would be nice to conceptually block them up. That's what areas allow us to do, and we're showing you the demo of that shortly. There's strongly typed helpers so that you can get nice and IntelliSense and compile time checking in your views. Okay, so that's a nice little tweak for some people. There was a lot of validation improvements. They started introducing some of the data annotations stuff so that when you've got model objects, they present their errors up nicely and make it a lot easier for people to build CRUD forms and things like that. Speaking of CRUD forms, improved scaffolding. So they've introduced a whole slew of stuff around being able to quickly and easily create those boring CRUD screens that most of us don't really like to build generally. The HTML render action call, that allows us to actually call other controllers and render out the output of that controller action within a view. Okay, so we can actually start composing web pages from different controller actions. And async controllers. So if you're building a complicated website where, for example, you might be making a slow network call as part of that page load, async controllers helps with performance there by not blocking everything up too much.
What's the best feature?
The best feature? I would probably say, generally, most practically good feature would be the validation enhancements. I hate validation code, it's just really boring. But the areas look like they could be handy. So I've got this slide in here, but...
Yeah, I think you should just go to a demo.
We'll just go straight to the demo. Yeah. All right, so I've got an MVC 2 app here, running it in VS 2010, but MVC 2 works happily in 2008 or 2010. MVC 3 only works in 2010 nicely, okay? So I've got this, this project here. I'll just run it up for you so you can see what it looks like. Oh, it's a really sexy site. I put a lot of time into the design of this, okay? And so it's basically the boilerplate out of the box MVC demo. And what I'm going to do is just jump in here. I'll stop that, just so that you kind of got something in your head. And you'll notice I've got an areas folder here. This is something that's new, obviously, for creating areas under. And if we go and look at the structure that we've got here, I've created a forum area. Okay, I think that's fairly disconnected from the rest of the site. And we've got the usual suspects, the controllers, the models, the views. So it's pretty much its own little website in there. Okay, we also have this forum area registration class. And if we have a peek in there, it's setting up the routes and giving it a name. So if you have a look down here where we're setting up this route, it's pretty much saying everything that lives under /forum is going to route into this area. We could customize this all we want, do whatever we want in there. And you'll notice that it inherits off area registration because the way that this all falls together is that in the global ASAX, we have this area registration, register all areas. Now that's put in there, that's all boilerplate. I didn't have to write any of that. And that just reflects the assembly and looks for any instances of area registration and kind of loads them in. So if we right click here and we go add area, I'll just create an example one to give you an idea what you're getting out of the box there. So it just creates the structure there along with that registration. You'll notice it hasn't created an example controller. That's because this is, I shouldn't call it a hack, but there are some limitations to areas. So if I created a controller called the home controller under blog, and I had a home controller under my main site, MVC goes, what's going on here? There's two home controllers. I do not understand this because it doesn't actually care about where it sits in the structure. It just goes by that name. So it'll get hell confused if you do that. So you do have to pay a bit of attention when you're working with areas to make sure that they don't collide. The other thing that you need to take into account when working with areas is how you actually put links into these things. So if you're using the action link stuff, which people should do, especially with the strongly typed helpers, because that way we can be sure our links are actually going to work. Let's have a look in here. It's a bit naff, to be honest. It's not the nicest piece of code. And you'll see,
this is this new area equals form bit, eh?
Yeah, that's some sexy code for a hyperlink. Now, a key note here for anybody who's working with the ASP and the MVC framework or the routing framework in general is that area is now a keyword. So if you were putting that into your URLs earlier, you're screwed. Okay, so stop using the word area in your URLs because it's reserved and has a special meaning in MVC now. I don't particularly like that syntax. I'm sure you could write your own nice little helpers to sort that out, create a forum link or something like that. So it seems a bit overboard, but just worth noting. The other thing I wanted to show off was the templating in MVC2. Who here's played with Microsoft's Dynamic Data? Hugely popular product. Okay. So it's basically a scaffolding system. So you point at it, model a database or whatever, and it will create the CRUD screens for you. So you point at a store, you can add a customer, edit a customer, see a list of the customers, delete them, and it's all really, really fast to get up and running. They've brought some of those learnings over from Dynamic Data into MVC, which is a far more popular product. It's not quite as fall off a boat easy as it was in Dynamic Data, but it's close enough. So if I run this up for a second, and we'll just go and have a look at the templating example. So that's what they refer to it as in MVC, as templating. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I've got this user management page where I can go in here, and this is just rendering out a list of properties of a given member. Okay, so is awesome, that's ticked, email address, blah blah blah. Okay, and if we click edit, we can jump in here and edit this person's details. And you'll notice that it's rendering out a password field for the password. It's a checkbox for the Boolean value, things like that. So how did we actually go about putting together this page? Let's just jump back here. It's a ridiculously small amount of code. So we go under member. Under the index, for rendering out just that detail, all we have is HTML.display for model. Okay? So we're allowing the MVC framework to go and inspect the model object that we've got at this point in time, and it's going and kind of reflecting against it and saying, oh, okay, so that's a Boolean and it needs to do this, that sort of stuff. So one line of code and we can render that out.
And that view page I can see is a view page of member.
That's right.
Yep.
So that's the type that it's expecting to see for the model. So that's up there. And if we go and have a look at edit, we have 2 lines of code where we just have a validation summary as well. So we've got this editor for model, and that's created that whole page where we can go through and edit all the properties on there. So if we go in and actually look at that model object, and we go in there, we've got member, I'll just scroll down, I've just got a helper method there for myself. You'll see that we've basically got this is awesome. Jeremy thought it was a good idea to go through and mod the behavior of that property, so it's always true. The data type there. So this is the data annotation stuff coming through. So data annotations kind of started appearing around the 3.5 version of the framework. It was kind of coming or driven by the dynamic data guys initially. And it just allowed us to kind of provide some metadata for our model objects to kind of say, hey, this is the type of editor I would like if you're editing this, or this property is required. It's kind of very, like a lightweight validation framework and kind of property type hinting sort of infrastructure. So here, the reason it's created a password field is because we said it's a data type.password. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. I'll just try and bring up IntelliSense. Yeah, so currency, date, times, duration, stuff like that, and it will subtly change the editor type. When we inevitably publish these up later for you guys to consume, there's a bunch of other ones that I've just commented in the top there that are useful. And you can even create editors for nested complex types. So for example, if you had a cart that has a line item, how do we render a line item? You can actually template that out yourself as well. So that's all nice and easy to work with, and that's all picked up by that MVC templating stuff. And I think that's pretty good. That's saving us a chunk of time on some of that more boring stuff that we work on. The other kind of two things that I wanted to demo around MVC2. There's obviously a slew of other smaller features, and Jeremy's going to be talking a bit about the, what's it called again? The model provider stuff.
A model binder?
Model binder. That's the word, binder. Must be getting near the end of tech ed for me. Okay. Speaking of which, why don't I just hand over to Jeremy?
Oh, thanks, man. Cool. So, I guess as I said, what I was quite keen to do is, I don't know about you guys, but if you've sort of taken a look at how MVC has been built up since the first release, it's not like the most awesome featured framework ever to come out, of a software company. It's very much a lightweight framework, and it's all about providing, closer access to the bare metal, closer to the HTTP request, as it were. And that's good because that's kind of what it's all about, giving you more control and making it lighter weight. But at the same time, there's not much there, and I guess not to rag on you, man, but that was a short demo. So inevitably, what you come to is that hey, this kind of doesn't solve this particular problem. But the really good thing about the framework, and I guess why I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it, is because it's a very extensible framework. And one of the things that we have done over the last few years, and I've seen pretty much every vendor, every sort of software development house who's sort of gotten into MVC kind of gets down this track, is we'll look at building up our own extensions to MVC that make sense for the way we do development, that provide us some infrastructure around what the core framework provides, and helps make our lives easier. So I thought I'd just cover off a few examples. They're not like the most awesome things you could ever do.
Don't talk yourself down, Matt. They are the most awesome things you could ever do.
They're just some ideas, I guess, to get you thinking about what's possible, where the extension points might be, and just remind you, I guess, that this framework is just that. It's a framework for you to build on, and it's very good at providing that. Okay. So let's start with a problem, and this is one I quite like, routing. Now we've got a great little routing framework that came alongside MVC. It's not actually part of MVC, it's part of the system.web, but it kind of shipped at the same time. Everyone uses routing with MVC, everyone kind of only uses routing with MVC, it seems. It's really good. It gives us the flexibility of saying, for this resource, this is the guy that's going to handle it. It's not like the page model where this page sits here on disk at this location. It's going to be the resource that's serving it up. Out of the box, everyone's kind of familiar with the old default stock controller action ID route, and that is given as a good example of why the routing framework is cool, because hey, look, we can use a wildcard type approach. We've got one route and everything just kind of works. All good if that's the way your site's structured. But when I have to deal with JD and his crazy SEO ideas, it doesn't kind of work that way. We have to put things in a logical structure, and it doesn't always mean that controller action is going to resolve to what I want to do. An example of this might be something like I've got a store which has a checkout, and I've got multiple post options to it, and I want to map those to different underlying actions on my controller. How do I declare that? Well, I start declaring manual routes. And as soon as I go down that path, well, that's when I have to start doing some work.
Bug at that.
Yeah. So, we could solve that with more routes. Or one of the things that I kind of like, and for anyone who's seen me talk over the years, you know, I'm passionate about a few things, but one of the things I'm kind of interested in is WCF. And WCF I thought was always really cool because it allowed us to declaratively specify what it was we were shipping over the wire. It had, you know, those code contracts for saying, hey, here's my service, here's the data, and really opt it all in and declare via attributes how everything worked. And it was quite understandable and I thought quite approachable for a lot of people. So one of the things I thought was, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could just extend the routing framework a little bit to have some sort of you know, contracts for routing. So we could do that. And I'll just flip over here. And have a quick look at how we might put this together. Okay, so I'll just use the Mindscape website as an example. I think it's a good example.
It's a very nice website. I'd buy their products.
Really? So at the moment, I've built this as a little MVC site, and let's say we go to buy a license, and we could buy a copy of Lightspeed, go through, yada yada, try and pay, it fails, need to fill in some more information. But anyway, I went through a few steps there. I went to /store, /checkout, step 1. In the MVC project, this is kind of set up as I've got a series of views and I've got a store controller, got a checkout step 1, checkout step 2. If we have a look at the controller really quickly, it's kind of got all those actions kind of declared there. And I've set this up. I always like to use contracts whenever I set things up. I don't know. That's just don't know about you guys. I think that's a good idea for declaring kind of what behaviour something has. So you can kind of see these are the actions that I'm specifying as part of this controller. Now behind this is a series of routes. I've set this up manually. And you can see here I've had to use map route, and for some of the trickier things, you know, you have to use the old .constraints.add verb.
That's some ugly code.
Well, it can get that way. It can get that way, yeah. So you don't really want to go there. So let's think about a nicer way of doing this. I kind of like the idea of doing something like all web contract store and get. Now I use my copy and paste skills.
You're ramping up the K-locks there, man.
I am. From K-locks to ka-ching, that's what I hear. Right. So I kind of like to mark it up kind of like that with attributes. That kind of tells me, you know, this is going to be a get request for purchase, get request for checkout, step 1, and so on and so forth. Okay, so obviously I'm going to need some attributes to sort of set this up, and so I'll bring in a little bit of code to back all of this. We'll have a look at what we're doing. Okay, so if we wanted to build this out as a little bit of an extension, it's not really too hard. What we're going to do is have some attributes. So we've got a web contract attribute, a get and a post, things that will match up to the kind of intent that I've got for this behaviour. We'll bring that in scope. Okay. And the way I want this to work is, you know, I've declared this on a code on a contract that my controller implements, and so I want it to be discoverable. Maybe I'll just use reflection or something to scan an assembly, see that a controller has one of these contracts. These are the things that it's saying it's publishing, and it will only publish routes for those.
Yep.
Okay. And so in order to do that, I'll kind of need a class which does that. And so I'll call it the web contract builder.
One you prepared earlier.
Well, you know, I have written this before, man. So basically the gist of what this guy will do is, you know, he's just going to go through a given assembly and scan for that, and then do all the semantics that I'd have to do to build that route manually, but just, you know, do it in a generic form and build it up on my behalf. Okay. One of the other things that you might think about doing, if you don't have to go to this level, is even just provide a simple sort of helper around building your routes. You know, because something like this, could really just be reduced down to something like route.get, and you have an extension method which is overloading on the route table.
And there's a lot of things in MVC like that. I mean, like the action link thing where we were saying that's blimmin' verbose. You can go and just wrap these things up nicely and make your life a bit easier.
That's right. Yeah. So I would highly recommend something like that. Particularly, I'm thinking about your areas demo. That would be a good example of where just having a little route overload would be kind of useful. Okay. So I'll compile that in, and what we'll do is we'll strip out all of the other routing. And we'll go to the store. Yeah, cool, he's gone. Sorry, no more sales. All right. And what we'll do is we'll say web contract builder dot build from assembly. All right, that looks happy. That's looking good.
Yep.
Now, I was talking about this earlier, and you said you actually quite like this in the code that we write.
I did, absolutely, because one of the things that, early on we were working on a fairly large MVC website, and one of the things that became a real hassle was trying to work out how a route actually was connected to a controller. Sometimes you're looking at a controller and you're like, somewhere there's a route that this is matching on, and I have no idea which one it is without having to spend half an hour looking. So now with these contracts, we have the awesome power of backtracing.
Really?
We can just follow it through. We can backtrace it. Yeah, it's good times.
Cool. I think you were looking for no, you don't want me to bust out that photo.
No.
Right. So, second thing I want to sort of cover off, because that's sort of well and good, but something kind of practical that you generally have to use is looking at model binding. And out of the box, you'll be pretty familiar with the default model binder, which has a pretty, it's got a sensible but generic kind of approach to resolving form data back into an object structure. And, that, again, it's kind of like the routing. If you can bend the way in which you do things to match that convention, things work kind of happily. But as soon as you go outside of that, things don't really work as happily as they might otherwise do. So that's, again, your sort of cue to say, hey, I want to extend this. And again, the framework provides some pretty easy hooks for allowing us to do this. All the model binders, the default model binder and anything else you come across which does automatic binding for you, will implement the iModel binder interface. There's a number of interfaces in the MVC framework which you can implement and then register your extension with the framework. And this is a sort of pretty simple and approachable example of one of these, where the goal really is to provide a custom way of mapping. There's one method to implement, bind model, and then we kind of map up the model state, bring things out of it, put things into it. It's not really too hard to achieve. So we have, obviously we sell a product Lightspeed, and one of the things with Lightspeed is that the default model binder kind of does some wacky things periodically to the entities if they're being bound through it. And so there was a little community code project that was spun up to implement a model binder specifically for Lightspeed entities and leverage the validation framework that's also in there as well to provide use of that. So I thought I'd walk quickly through that and just sort of show you how it's implemented. Again, this is the kind of thing you probably do when maybe you've got an in-house DAO or something which you're building up your own little objects with a base class and they don't map very well. Or you've just got some very complex type. And you reminded me actually that up until recently they didn't actually have a way of binding certain data types back in.
Yes, so MVC2, for example, and there's a laundry list of tiny little bullet point changes. They added in the ability to bind binary data into byte arrays on their model binder. So sometimes it's not even that you have particularly complex objects that you want to bind. It's just that there's certain types that you want to use. The default model binder just doesn't know how to marry them up. So
indeed,
it can be handy.
Cool. So again, I mean, the code for this is pretty simple, really. We've got our I model binder. We bind the model. And in the case of Lightspeed, kind of behind the scenes, the way it works is we've got like an internal representation of what properties there are there, and we call this the value model tree. And so rather than, the default model binder kind of uses reflection and tries to understand what properties can be bound to, and, does the data match up, and tries to do a little type conversion and things of that nature. We know all of that in advance, so we can do it a bit of a smarter way. And then at the end, as I said, Lightspeed's got a little validation framework, so we know we can test for this as valid property and then actually attach the errors meaningfully, stripping out anything that's not required.
Yeah. So that's hooking all into that validation framework that I talked about as being beefed up in MVC2.
Absolutely, yeah. So a quick example of this guy would be if we go and buy a license again and continue the payment, and same, yeah, that's interesting. What happened here?
Hope you got indemnity insurance, man. You're losing me a lot of sales.
Store's down. Well, let's jump back here for a sec. One thing I didn't show you before. Oh, here we go. The action that maps to checkout step 2. Good times. Cool. So what I want to show you there is the error message that comes back looks kind of a bit whacked. It's basically the .toString of an errors property which exists on the Lightspeed object, and it not only is it concatenated, it contains things that I really don't want to see.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the reasons why we thought, well, that's a good idea to have a custom model binder. So applying that is fairly simple. To use model binder once you've actually created it, we register it. We've got this model binders.binders.add, specify a type, and then say, here's the instance of the model binder that we'll use for this guy. One little tidbit here, I guess, is that you specify it for a specific type. And so in the case of, in our scenario, Lightspeed entities, you're going to have a domain model. You're going to have more than one type that you want to register this for. So I've got a little helper here. We can register it for all types in an assembly. It just scans through anything that implements entity, it will register it for. So if we add that in, just looking happier.
Yeah.
Cool. So again, pretty simple stuff, but very useful. And it's just these little extensions that are going to make your life easier. Right. So last one I want to just share with you is one around building plugins. Now, if you've been using MVC for a wee while, you're probably thinking to yourself, there's not too many control vendors out there building controls for MVC. When web forms came out, there was like a glut of control vendors everyone pushing their grid. But not the same really for MVC. In fact, a lot of the control vendors have kind of just done things like, this JavaScript framework has a bunch of UI controls, we'll kind of wrap our stuff around them. One of the reasons, and I guess if you've looked at this area yourself, one of the reasons it gets kind of tricky is because sharing things like routing or views becomes problematic. You can copy and paste the files around, but you don't generally want to do that. If you're shipping something like a plugin, you probably want it just to be referenced as a library in assembly. And then there's issues with coupling and all that sort of interesting stuff. Now, clearly those sort of problems are solved. We'd use an IOC container. IOC generally as an approach to resolve coupling. That's pretty standard. For the MVC specific stuff though, we can actually create plugins and we can share stuff around. There's a few, and this is where one of the good things about MVC is it is sort of open source, and that you can go and download the source code and read it and understand very clearly how the framework has been put together. It's not a big framework, so it's not going to take too much of your time to just try and delve in and understand a little bit about how it works. If you're trying to solve a problem, you think, if only the framework did this, it may well be within your grasp. One of the things that I learned when I was sort of delving around is that views are actually just rendered from a stream, any old stream, which means that it actually would be fairly easy to replace a view. It doesn't have to come from disk, it could come from a database, it could come from somewhere in memory. So that might not be too hard after all. So had a quick blat at this idea. And let's say, for example, JD, I'm launching 4 new websites tomorrow, and I'm going to use our common login page and stuff like that for it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of stuff like I go to login, it's got this view, it's got that functionality behind it, it does the work with the database and all that sort of thing. That's what I want to preserve. So I could just start each new project and copy across all that stuff, or I could compile that down to a little plugin. So I'll do the latter, because previously we've been doing the former, and I haven't really enjoyed that.
No.
So all of the security concerns, the login and things like that, are inside a controller called security controller here, this guy here. And I'll just delete him. He's gone. Same with the views.
We don't need any security on our website. It's good.
Oh yeah, sorry. The store's down and security's offline. And there's some routes here as well, so we'll get rid of those. Cool. Yep, it's gone. Excellent. So what I've done is I've prepared a little plugin for us, and really this is just a class library that I've created earlier and copied things across to, where I've got the controller, I've got the contract for that controller, which I've decorated with those routing attributes, because that's going to make it a little bit easier for me to add the routes. I could create a plugin with a model where maybe I had an initialize for it, where it just attached things to the route table that it needed. You could do it that way. And then the controller itself is pretty much the same, but we've sort of tweaked the way in which the views are going to be rendered. It looks kind of strange to me, and I don't think it will work, but we'll see. And then the views themselves are just exactly the same as they were before, okay? Yep. One thing to note here is that I'm actually, with these views, I'm building them as an embedded resource, so I'm going to embed them in the DLL itself, so that's all ship around.
So your plugin is just a single assembly?
It is,
That's
yep.
it. Yep.
So we'll build that up, and what I'll do is go back to the web project where we've lost our security, and I'll add a reference. To that security plugin. Cool. And now that I've got them in there, because I'm using that routing, probably what I want to do is bring that in first. And the interesting thing about the routing is that clearly it also brings in the references to the controllers, because the routing then says, okay, well this resource is handled by this controller in this action. Okay.
At the rate we're going, I think our website's just going to be 52 lines in the global ASX and nothing else. Keep going.
So we're back to this thing I sort of mentioned and glossed over. What is this? Well, this is going to be a special syntax that I'm going to use to tell something about where to get the view from. Mm-hmm. Now remember, the thing that I discovered was that views don't have to come from the disk. They can come from any stream. And the way MVC works is when we say something like, oh, I want view blah, there is an underlying mechanism which can be extended for translating a string into a stream of data which represents a view, which then gets handed off to a view engine, which then transforms it into HTML. Okay? Mm-hmm. These things aren't particularly well discoverable unless you go to the source, and that's again a great reason why MVC, it is so approachable, because the source code is there. That's a big plug for open source, isn't it? So infrastructure, I've got this plugin path resolver. And so this guy here is a virtual path provider, and anyone who's sort of looked at the web, system.web, in any detail, this will probably be a familiar class to them. This is the guy which resolves, like squiggly, squiggle, slash, whatever, to an actual path, and you can create your own extensions for these as well. So the MVC framework also uses the virtual path provider, and what we're going to do is jack into this and say anything that starts with plugins, we'll provide our own implementation. For anything else, we'll just get handled by default, so I'll go to the disk. And what we're going to do is we're going to work out what assembly to open it up, open up its resources, grab the resource with the view, send it down the pipe. Okay? So if I register this, and again, you are right, we are starting to build a 50-line global ASAX here. System.web.hosting.hosting-environment.register. There you go, security's back online, buddy.
Nice.
Yeah, so again, just 3 little examples there to show you how you can take what's already out of the box. I mean, we had a working site. And then we've kind of just tweaked it, extended it, created some reusable parts that we can now take over to our other MVC implementations. Now, I'll be quite happy to share all that sort of code with you, and I challenge you guys to create some interesting extensions that I can use in my next site. How's that? So with that, I thought I'd leave you plenty of time to talk about 3.0, because I think that's kind of a real interesting part of the session. Mm-hmm. We've kind of got a lot of stuff in the base already, but there's some interesting things coming in the future, aren't there?
There is. There absolutely is. That's the end of your tech ed stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Lucky. I particularly like the plugin stuff because it really it does kind of suck having to drag around the views, controllers, your helper utilities. It's just overkill. Single DLLs are quite nice. So MVC3. So this has been talked about a wee while, and Microsoft have actually been reasonably open with what they were planning to do with it. You can go to the Codeplex site and see and chip in your thoughts and whatnot. There's a big push for .NET 4. Okay, so you can't use this with 2008. Like I say, it's all built on .NET 4, so you have to be using that. The framework itself is generally maturing. The feature changes are typically quite small. Although there is one main headline feature that seems to have grabbed a lot of attention, which is the Razor View Engine. Who here hasn't heard of the Razor View Engine? Yeah, cool, a few people. So you'll know that for the last 10 years or so we've had ASPX files, and we do the old angle bracket percent and express things that way. Razor is a new kind of syntax for expressing views, okay, from Microsoft, where they've kind of taken, borrowed, embraced and extended some of the capabilities of other view engines or from other kind of web development stacks altogether. So they're trying to make it so that you don't have to type quite so much. I mean, I think we can all agree that ASPX files can be a fraction on the verbose side. Has to be really easy to learn because you want to kind of port your existing skills. So that includes if I know C# or VB and I want to do my inline code that way, I should be able to just write C# or VB. And of course, Microsoft usually go to town on the Visual Studio integration, IntelliSense and all that nice stuff, which doesn't often exist for some of the kind of open source view engines for ASP.NET MVC. So that's going to be quite nice. It is important to note, however, that in Preview 1 for MVC3, there is no IntelliSense or syntax highlighting. So we're going to walk through and have a look at the syntax and that in a demo. In fact, is that next? It is. So
I like the name of it, Razor View Engine.
You can guarantee Microsoft will change that name. It's too cool for Microsoft.
Oh, it's not.
You wait, buddy. We'll bring out the Apple View Engine called Razor. Okay, let's go for MVC3 demo. So here I've got an ASP.NET MVC3 website. You'll also notice that I'm running this side by side with MVC2 and the other IDE, so you've got no problems maintaining multiple sites with different versions there. Now, one of the first things you'll notice with the Razor View Engine is if we go add new, And when you create a new MVC3 site, it kind of says, do you want to create this with Razor or do you want to create it with the ASPX view engine to start you off? So if we go add new item, we wait for this to pop up, you'll see here that we've got these Razor items. And so they've changed the terminology a little bit, and this is actually more of a mapping over to a lot of the popular other web stacks out there, like Ruby on Rails and things like that, where a master page is now kind of called a layout page. Same thing, okay? The partial page, user control, okay? Same thing. So they just tweak the terminology, but otherwise there's pretty much a one-to-one mapping of everything you already knew from the ASPX view engine, okay? So we'll just close that, and you'll notice that there's a couple of new extensions. Because I'm a C# guy, so the extension there is CSHTML. If you used the VB version, it would be VBHTML. Okay, so you can tell pretty quick if you're working with Razor just by looking at the files. And so we'll start off by having a look in this shared folder, and we've got this layout. Now they've got an underscore at the front, which I believe it was Hamel in Railsland that kind of started off with the whole, we put underscores on layouts and things like that. But we're a little bit perplexed as to why they're doing it at the moment, because if you look at things here, as well as partials start with underscores, they just type in the underscore. So I'm not actually sure if that's really a requirement at this stage. But you'll notice here, and sorry it's a bit hard to see without any syntax highlighting, but we've got this inherits system.web.mvc.web view page, okay? And I'll just keep bouncing backwards and forwards between that one and the MVC2 one, just to give you an idea of what's changed. So in the olden days, we had the angle bracket %. Basically, we're scrapping those, tossing them out. Saves you a few characters. Also, because the language is kind of indicated by the file now, CSHTML, we don't need to bother about specifying the language. So all we actually need is this inherits that there. And I was reading the other day on Scott Goo's blog where they're trying to work out a way of getting rid of that as well, so that you can actually just start your HTML output. Okay? And if we jump back to 3, you'll see here, this is how we're accessing objects in our model. So we've got this @view.title. Okay? So once again, the way that Razor is interpreting this when it's compiling the view is it's looking at it and saying, oh, I've seen an @ symbol. Okay, that must mean I've got some code coming to, or variable access in line. I'm going to spit that out. So it's pretty much, without the angle bracket %. And there's a few other bits down here. So we've got the HTML helper stuff in there for rendering out a partial, and that's going to go off and find the login partial over here. You'll see some weird syntax. I'm going to explain that in a little bit. That's actually a really awkward file to try and explain the syntax in. But otherwise, I mean, it's just a more lightweight kind of way of expressing your views. Okay, so it's nothing to be too worried about. If you were starting an MVC project once this is kind of finished, one or the other is going to be fine, but I wouldn't be intimidated that there's a big learning curve with Razor. It's just kind of going to get you there. One of the nice things, though...
Do you think they'll have like a reformatting tool? Like reformat as Razor?
That would be quite cool.
Yeah.
If only we knew a software products company that could build stuff. One thing that is quite nice, though, with Razor over the ASPX view engine is that by default, everything that's getting rendered out gets encoded, HTML encoded, so that you're kind of safe. That's one of those things, you look at all the demos and you go, oh, that's right, encoding. I should double check that I'm actually doing that with all my fields. By default, that's how everything comes out of Razor. You actually have to go to some lengths to try and disable that, but that's quite a nice thing. And you'll notice down here we have this render body. Okay, so this is just a helper method, effectively, that's kind of saying this is where the main content will go. All right, that's pretty handy.
Well, just a quick question for you, man. With web forms, I've got master pages, and I can have those content sections, content placeholders.
Yep.
Can you do that with this?
You absolutely can. Render body is just a shortcut way of just saying the one called body. Yep.
Okay. And what if I have got like 4 sections?
4 sections?
Yeah, so like a render section or something like that?
That's it. Surprising you know that. Render section, and you can pass in the name, obviously, is that render body is just a shortcut way of kind of doing the main one.
Right.
So, and you can obviously call all the other stuff that we got as part of MVC2 with the whole render action call, things like that. It all just works. So that's quite nice. Now, what I've done, I'll run this up. because one of the things that I find is a little bit, not weird, but it is the only real part of the learning curve, is how you actually output things when you start doing things like string concatenation, or you're trying to put something together to render out that's not just a straight variable. So this is going really fast. So you'll see here that I've got inline literals and HTML aware. Okay, what does that mean? What are we actually doing to generate these numbers? If I jump back in here, and I'll stop the debugger, and we look at the index page. Okay, so hopefully you can all read that. There we're doing the @ symbol, and then we've got an opening brace there. Now that's pretty much instructing Razor that we have a code block now. Okay, so that means that now because we're now executing code, how do we tell this that it's actually got to output something as part of that block? So we've just got the loop running through, and we wanted to output the value. So what we do is we have this @ again, @ brace, and that's telling it whatever's happening in here, echo it out to the response. Okay, and then this kind of weird syntax where if you then want to concatenate that with a string literal, in our case a non-breaking space, you use this @ syntax. Okay, it's a little bit strange. You know, to be frank, you know, we obviously haven't built a website with Razor yet. It's pretty damn new. I'm not 100% sure yet whether I'm going to like this. But
I'm not sold on that part of it anyway.
Yeah.
So that could use a tweak.
Yeah, but the thing is, it has a lot of smarts in how it actually does this as well. So if you look, for example, down here where we have the HTML aware version, what happens here is Razor's actually smart enough to pick up that angle bracket B, close angle bracket, is HTML. So we don't actually have to expressly say, oh, you know, output the string literal with an @. It kind of works that out. I don't know. Again, it's kind of nice. Not sure about that. And a lot of what goes on you know, to do with the discussion around Razor Online is mostly talking about these sorts of features. You know, it seems to be the sticking point for a few people.
I can see that could quickly, you know, in the wrong hands, that could lead to a somewhat polluted code.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other thing, I mean, that's kind of, unfortunately, kind of Razor in a nutshell. You know, they're still evolving the Razor View Engine itself. You can kind of go and contribute some thoughts back. So Microsoft, has anybody here used the Spark View Engine with MVC? Handful of you? Cool. So basically Microsoft went and hired the guy who wrote the Spark View Engine and was like, how about you build it again with Microsoft on the box, you know? And it's very Spark-esque. There's a lot of things that he's brought over. And Spark is a very nice view engine. So.
It seems actually inspired by a couple of view engines, really, because there's the Spark and then there's Haml from the Rails world, where it seems to have borrowed a few conventions from.
Yeah, well, the old underscore at the start sort of thing as well. Yep. Okay, so something else that's kind of new in MVC3 that it's kind of nice if you operate this way is dynamic. Actually, did I have a slide for this? Let's just check. No, I'll just demo it now then. Is dynamic view data. So who here uses strongly typed view data objects when they're working with MVC? A handful of you. And who here uses the whole view data square bracket, you know, property bag style? No one.
Oh, there was a half hand, I think.
Yeah, somebody's like, oh shit, no, scratching my chin. Okay. So there's been a minor improvement around this, which might be of interest to the cheek scratchers in the audience, which is this dynamic keyword is coming in. So again,
now this is because MVC3 is targeting .NET 4 only. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So you'll know that .NET 4 comes with this dynamic keyword, which kind of says, you know, I'm this mysterious late bound kind of everything happens inside the black box keyword. So here we've got this view model object, and if we rest over that, we can actually see that it's defined as dynamic controller-based view model. So this means that we can go view model.I love magic strings and also Oracle like that, okay? And that's more or less the same thing as view model. I'm not even sure how this works because I don't do it this way. You know, I love blah, 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 blah equals whatever, okay? Yeah. But it just gives you, a tidier syntax. It looks a little bit more elegant. And that means that down here on your web page, you can just output it in the same way. Again, I say magic strings because you kind of have to know what you actually put on there. Although, interestingly, I don't know if anybody noticed that I deleted that off there before. If the object isn't actually, the property's not there, it doesn't throw an error, it just doesn't render anything for that, that string. So dynamic view data, that seems to be in about the top 3 features that they're talking about with MVC3. I'm not really sure it's particularly required. But,
I think it's interesting, because if you look at, say, Rails, for example, which clearly, MVC borrows a lot of learning from that, is, they had active record, which is dynamic, dynamically generated properties for things from the database. That works quite well because it just saves a lot of code being written. So I guess if you could find a way of using that, just use it to pass through data from some other data source without having to write a lot of typed code, that might be quite useful for you.
Absolutely, a good point. Now, what I'm going to do, so we've seen a bit of Rails and the dynamic stuff. Now, there's a couple of things, we mentioned that this is preview 1. Who here actually uses IOC containers? I'm doing a lot of polls today. Okay, so 25% of the audience. So basically, Microsoft wanted to make using IOC containers a lot easier in MVC3. And so they've taken this common service locator library, okay, which is more or less just an interface for any service locator. So if you liked an inject, you can go and drop it in there because there's this common interface that everybody's using. Or if you like structure map, you can go and use that. And effectively, they're just kind of surfacing those access points throughout the MVC framework now. And at the moment, this is quite a wordy slide, but they've got a bunch of things around the controller factories and injecting controllers, but they are planning to make it so that the model binders, value providers, blah, 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 is all injectable as well. I've got a note on there about being fundamentally balked in Preview 1, and I would suggest not even really trying to use this capability in Preview 1.
What's wrong in Preview 1?
Well, the nice thing, what was it? I have a passion for contracts.
Yep.
I know with the ladies on that one, I'm sure. But basically, this common service locator library, we have this interface, all right? I know you're planning to zing me now and I'm scared. And that's published out there as open source. Okay, and anyone can go and grab it. So Microsoft were like, cool, let's go grab that, let's put it into the MVC framework. What should we not do with a contract?
Well, break it.
Yeah, let's go alter that guy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we altered that and we shipped MVC3, and nothing that actually conforms to the common service locator actually conforms to our version of the common service locator. So all of those other products that actually are meant to plug in, they don't plug in. So they've said, we're going to fix this in Preview 2. So if you're keen on the IOC stuff, hold fire. Okay, and they've been pretty upfront about that. I think it's a bit of an embarrassing mistake. But anyway, some other useful stuff. So global filters, I actually think this is a nice little improvement. So we have a controller, and you go and put your old handle errors at the top, or global rescues, or something like that.
Yep,
we do.
Love that.
Yep, and you go and plug it onto every controller, or maybe you have a base controller and you can do it on there. Basically, Jeremy will be happy, in the global ASX, we can register global filters now. So we can just say this is going to apply everywhere.
Yep.
Okay, it's a nice little tidy up. We covered dynamic view models. There's a bunch of new action results, common sense action results, like 301 redirects for proper nice redirecting. There's a HTTP status code response, so that just allows you to say, oh look, I really wanted to issue, a 709 or whatever the heck you wanted, and allows you to nicely just wrap that up and send that down the line. They also fixed the 404 one, which there's a few technical reasons why the built-in stuff there wasn't very good. They've improved the JSON and AJAX stuff around model binding. So effectively what you can do in MVC3, well, in MVC2 with the model binders, right, we're posting back values, or maybe they're even in the URL string if it's a get.
Yep.
And MVC picks that up with its default model binder and kind of stuffs the values in. One thing it didn't do wasn't able to do, was take in JSON objects and bind them, or unbind them, as the case may be. In the new MVC3 stuff, they take JSON objects, they can handle those and bind them up. Yeah. There's data annotation support in .NET 4. So we talked earlier about how data annotations had been introduced with .NET 3.5-ish with dynamic data, and it was kind of there, but kind of not really a properly supported thing. And then the NC framework started using it. They kind of baked it in properly at .NET 4, and they added some additional attributes. So they basically just upgraded that support to the latest and greatest version of data annotations, which gives you a little bit more validation stuff and things like that. So that's kind of a quick whip around of the MVC3 stuff. Like I say, you could go and have a look at it now. I'd probably hold fire, just because it's not the greatest experience at the moment. It is only the first preview.
I think, as you said, man, if you're running Visual Studio 2010, it sits side by side really happily, and obviously it does only install on 2010. So, if you're doing that, that's probably it's probably worth looking at. Certainly, like I think the View engine looks interesting. So it's certainly worth a look.
Absolutely. So in summary, go out, grab your ASP.NET MVC2. Impress Jeremy by sending him some community code and some cool ideas, stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that can be done there, and do start having a look around it. MVC3.
One other thing I sort of thought about there as well, keep an eye out with the community for plugins and things like that as well. I mean, there's things, even just starting with the old MVC contrib of libraries that you can go and use for, things that other people have built to enrich, your MVC sites. So, it's all about building up that little community, getting things out there, sharing ideas, and as I said, the framework's really extensible for allowing you to do that.
Yeah. We've got some links there that you can write down. And that more or less kind of brings us to the end. So thank you very much for coming along.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah, thanks for that. One thing I want to mention was, in some of our other sessions, we've been offering a fairly ridiculous discount on Lightspeed licenses, and a few people have been coming up and asking for us for them. So if you'd like that, just come up the front and we'll sort you out at the end while we're packing up. So yeah, cheers, and enjoy TechFest tonight.
Yeah.